Hi everyone, welcome to another Writing Support Center workshop. My name is Giselle and today's workshop is titled Cite It Right, APA Citation. Before we begin today, I do want to mention that this workshop is heavily based on the library's workshop, which is also available on the Writing Support Center Canvas shell. The main difference between the library's workshop and this one is that this one includes a worksheet. So if you are completing this workshop and you need some sort of proof to provide your instructor that you've completed the workshop, you will get a worksheet that you can turn into your instructor. If you don't need a worksheet, then you can watch the library's workshop as well. Like I said, this workshop is based heavily on their workshop. So thank you to the PCC library for providing this information. So before we begin, I do have a few tips for you. If you have taken a Writing Support Center workshop in the past, this will seem familiar to you. So please skip forward to the next slide if you do not want to hear this information again. If this is your first workshop, I am going to suggest that you do a few things in order to get the most out of this workshop. The first tip I have is to complete the activity worksheet that comes with this workshop. Wherever you access this workshop, there should be a worksheet available in both a doc and PDF format. Now, what I would suggest is if you can use a doc, I would say that you use a doc instead of the PDF. The reason why is because APA suggests certain fonts to use when formatting your citations or to use throughout your paper. So if you use the doc, you can modify which font you want to use. Versus if you use the PDF, you will have a set font, which is APA, which is okay with APA style. However, if you want to modify that, you're going to have more flexibility with the Word doc. My second tip is to take your time. Since this is a recorded workshop, you can pause when you need to and rewind if needed. If you need to pause to get some information off the screen, if you need to pause to complete an activity, please do so. That's one of the many benefits of having these workshops recorded. So I do want to review our workshop goals before we get started. The first goal is to review general APA formatting guidelines for the 7th edition. So this workshop is based off of the 7th edition of the APA Style Guide, which is the most current edition of APA. The second goal is to learn the importance of citing your sources and when you should cite. And the third is to practice formatting, writing in-text citations, and citing your sources on your references page. So to begin, I want to review a few general APA formatting guidelines. The first guideline I have for you is to type in double space on standard size paper. That would be 8.5 by 11. The second is to include a page header, a running head at the top of every page. For student papers, this only includes the page numbers. The running head essentially is a shortened version of your paper's title and cannot exceed 50 characters, including spacing and punctuation. However, like I said, if you are just writing a student paper, it should just include the page number. You want to also use an accessible font. So APA style does not specify a single font or set of fonts for professional writing. It does recommend a few fonts that are widely available. This includes 11-point Calibri, 11-point Arial, and 12-point Times New Roman. But you can use any sans serif font that is easy to read and accessible. Always check with your instructor for guidance because maybe your instructor has a specific preference, but in general, you can use one of the three I listed here and you should be fine. I also suggest the APA manual requires that you indent the first line of new paragraphs. And finally, you want to include a title page that includes the page number, the title of your paper, your name, the college's name, and the course and instructor. I do want to give you an example of what a title page looks like. This example is from PCC Stratford Library. As you can see, there is the page number up here in the right corner. Then you have the title of your research paper, your original title, your name, Pasadena City College, the name of the course, including the numeration and the title, your professor's name, and the date. Now we're going to practice. So on your worksheet, you're going to type out the information required for an APA formatted title page. If you are using the Word doc, you can center it the way it's centered on the example I just showed you. However, you can also begin creating the document and write your title page in a separate doc. And then in the portion where you do the activity, you could just write C paper so that your instructor knows that you created your title page while taking this workshop. If not, you can just put the information you need for your title page on the worksheet and then copy and paste that into your title page later. So go ahead and pause here, complete the activity, and continue once you're done. All right, so moving on, we're going to review why you should cite your sources. So when you cite your sources, it gives credit to the original author. This helps you avoid plagiarizing. Sometimes plagiarism is unintentional, and that happens when students or writers do not cite their sources appropriately. And citation is going to vary based on which style of citation you're using. So that is why it's important to know the basics of APA styles so that you can cite your sources appropriately. The second reason why you should cite your sources is because it allows your readers to look up sources on their own. So if your reader wants to learn more or read more from the sources you cited, providing the information will help them find it. So this is why it's important to cite your sources. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is when to cite your sources. So there are 3 separate times you want to make sure that you're citing your sources. The first is when you're quoting. Quoting is when you borrow a section from someone else's work, word for word. This is the most common place where people understand to cite their sources. However, you should also cite your sources when you're paraphrasing. So paraphrasing happens when you put someone else's writing in your own words. And you should also cite your sources when summarizing. So when you borrow a section, put it in your own words and you condense it. So these are the 3 times you should make sure that you cite your sources. When you cite your sources, you essentially create what is called an in-text citation. In-text citations exist for APA format, and they are formatted in a certain way. So the format of your in-text citations is determined by whether or not you are quoting, paraphrasing, or summarizing. So if you're paraphrasing or summarizing, your in-text citation should include the last name, a comma, and the year of the piece when it was published. When you quote, you want to include the last name, a comma, the year, a comma, and the page number. So you have to provide the page number for quoting, but you do not have to provide that when you're paraphrasing or summarizing something someone else said. So an in-text citation example of paraphrasing or summarizing is here. As you can see, there's a quote. It reads, a series of students has investigated how the extent that students believe that people can change their economic standing in the US can serve a motivational function. And then here is the important part, which is the in-text citation. Of course, this person is paraphrasing or summarizing, so they did include the author's names, a comma, and the year. So as you can see, there's no page number when paraphrasing or summarizing. When you do an in-text citation for quoting, you'll notice that the in-text citation has the author's name, a comma, the year, a comma, and the page number, including the P here to indicate the page number. When you don't mention the author here, so if the author is not mentioned in your sentence, then you would need to put the author's last name in the parenthetical citation. But there is another way that you can do it. So you can mention the author's name. So in this quote, the person writes, according to Destin, and then they put the year. So if you are going to mention the author's name when you're writing about the quote, or yes, about the quote, you do want to make sure that you put the year next to the author's name. And then the page number is placed at the end of the the quotation. So the difference between here is because the author's name is mentioned here, the year is placed after the author's name, and then the page number comes at the end. So both are correct. It just depends on your writing style and what you prefer to use when you are writing these in-text citations. So now we're going to do another practice. This practice is going to focus on creating an in-text citation for a current assignment. So whatever you're currently working on, you want to create an in-text citation for that assignment. You can write an in-text citation for a quotation, paraphrase, or summary. So of course, this would need a secondary source or a source that you can quote from. So if you don't have one, maybe there's something from the class that you can use, but you do need a source in order to do this assignment. So you can use what you type out for when you create your reference page later. So this is just some practice, and hopefully you can use it when you go to actually create that in-text citation in your actual paper. So if you are using the Word version of the worksheet, again, you can choose a font and make sure it matches whatever font you use for the title page. So go ahead and pause here, complete the practice question, and then when you're done, continue with the workshop. All right, so we're moving on to talk about the APA references page. So the references page appears at the end of your paper. It provides the information necessary for a reader to locate and retrieve the sources you cite. Every source you cite should be included in your references list. So if it's mentioned in your paper, it needs to be on your references page. Your references should begin on a new page separate from the essay. So even if you have a lot of room on that last page of your paper, you still want to create a new page just for the references list. The page should be labeled references with the title centered at the top of the page. Do not bold, underline, or use quotation marks for the title. Just write references. And the page should be double spaced. Here's an example from PCC Shatford Library of a references page. As you can see, the first line includes the author's name and first initial, in some cases also the middle initial. You can also see that it's listed in alphabetical order, and each reference seems to include information such as the author's last name and first initial, last name and initial for any other authors that are included, and names of journals, the page ranges, and URLs. These are just some similarities between these different references. So just take a look. This is similar to what yours will look like when you create it. So here's a couple of reference formats. There's three here. Of course, there's many more different reference formats depending on what you're referencing. But these are three very common format references that are generally used. So whenever you are going to format your references, you first need to identify the type of resource. So is it a book, an ebook, a journal article, a news article, a website, or something else? Once you've identified the type of resource, then you can find the format that you should use for that reference. So for an ebook reference, you want to include the author's last name, their first initial, a middle initial, the year, the title of the book, subtitle, the edition information if it's given, and the publisher. And then at the end, you would give the DOI if it's given. If you notice, there are various types of punctuation. So make sure you're using the appropriate punctuation. Sometimes you'll need to use a comma, sometimes you'll need to use a period. Now, if you're referencing an article from a library database, you would include the last name, the first initial, the middle initial if given, the year, the title of the article, and the subtitle. Notice it is not italicized the way that the title of the book is. You would then give the name of the journal, the volume, the issue with no space in between, the page numbers, and the DOI. And the last reference format I have on this page is the website reference. So for that, you would include the author's last name, the first initial, the middle initial, the year, month, day with no comma in between month and day, the title of the web page, italicized, and the name of the website if it's different from the author name. So if it, again, if it differs, then that's when you would provide that. And then the web page address. So these are three different formats that you can use. Of course, there are many more, and you can check out the APA style guide available on the PCC Stratford Library's website, or you can check OWL Purdue. I will be giving both links to those at the end of this workshop. So those are two sources where you can look for the other types of reference formats if you need them. So we're on to our last practice. And for this practice, you're going to create a reference for your references page. You can create a reference using an ebook, article from a library database, website reference, all of which are provided in the previous slide, or you can do something else. Again, if you are referencing something that isn't an ebook, article, or website reference, you can look up the different formatting styles on Purdue OWL's website, or on the library's website as well. Again, I will be providing those links at the end of the workshop, so you can always check those out. You can also do so by Googling OWL Purdue APA style. They have a 6th edition guide and a 7th edition guide, so just make sure you're looking at the 7th edition guide. I'm also going to provide a link in the transcript, so if you do use a reference that is not one of the three formats I gave you, you can go ahead and locate the appropriate reference format that you need. So go ahead and pause here and create your reference on your worksheet. And once you're done, continue with the workshop. All right, so that brings us to the end of the workshop. Again, I wanted to give you the sources that I use for this workshop, but also sources that you can use as you continue to use APA style. So the PCC library actually has an APA quick guide. You can type this link into your browser, and I will also provide the link in the transcript. And this is a great place to go if you want more detailed information on how to use APA style. The other website I would suggest you use is OWL Purdue's APA style 7th edition. Again, they have both 7th and 6th So you want to make sure that you're looking at the most current edition of APA. And you can find that at this link, which I will also be placing in the transcript. Thank you for attending today's workshop. Again, if you have any questions on APA style, you can also visit the library's website, or you can visit the Writing Support Center to speak to a tutor. Thank you and have an awesome day.